2020.
I don't want to like surprise you live in person, but I think I have another good topic to squeeze in there. So I know you like surprises. All right, we're gonna start this. I'm running this through Google Slides today, so don't hate. But yeah, let's see if I can share screen. All right, let's do this. Amy, you come on.
It's trying.
Loading. PC load letter. Come on. You are screen sharing. We are sharing black screen. Hold on. Well, there we go. Amy, do you see it?
Not yet. Oh, there you go. We're good.
All right. Awesome. All right. Everybody's favorite topic. Apologize once again for the weird connection issues. I'm going to blame Eventbrite because I can. We were having some emails earlier from people complaining about getting through the Eventbrite link. So whatever happened, we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. But you were all here. There was 80, 90 pre-registered. So everybody loves a good old PPC conversation. So yeah. So how this is going to work? We're going to mix it up a little bit today. Amy and I are going to kind of kick off some things. I'm going to walk through PPC in as simple of a form as I can. And then we're going to pop on with both Robert from commonsku and then Raj from HIT. We're going to have a little bit of open dialogue with the two of them, both on implementing PPC as well as things to come and improvements that the standards committee is working on for PPC. So as with every education session, then a day or so, they're posted to our YouTube channel. So if there's things that are said or you want to kind of, go back to and look at for reference, you can always hop on YouTube. Just Google PromoStandard on YouTube. It's in there, I promise you. So having said that, let's see the other Clickosaurus. There we go. Yeah, that's me. Sorry. Hold on. Back up. All right. Real quick, it's important. I don't know why we blew through everything at 1,000 miles an hour, but we review this at the beginning of every PromoStandards meeting. We review it at the beginning of every education session. But I think it's always an important thing to understand who we are, where we come from. So our mission statement is we collaborate to create industry-leading open standards. Hashtag on the old open standard that enable industry participants to improve customer experience, reduce transactional friction, and effectively execute their digital strategy. That was drafted 2016, maybe, and I think it still holds true to what we're about. So, yeah, let's go. All right. Before I turn it over to Amy to push a few things, right now, if you're not aware, many of you probably are aware and are participating. On this past Friday, we kicked off the PromoStandards Hackathon. It's our second year. It's our second annual PromoStandards Hackathon. We have 6 teams competing for lots of prizes, recognition, swag, you name it. Most importantly, permanent enshrinement on our trophy that we pass around, the Conway Cup. You can't forget about that thing. So if you have not registered yet, just go post on Slack. It's in there in the general channel. On Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and I'm going to throw the links up there at the end of this, there is the presentations for the hackathon. Even if you aren't participating in the hackathon, we'd love to have you chip in, where you're going to have 4 judges from across the industry, various skill sets, some technical, some not technical, and that's okay because I think that we want to get that wide perspective and also the exposure of what's happening. So make sure if you're doing the hackathon, we're watching the teams. It's a pretty awesome. Some of the topics going back and forth right now. If you're not participating, check it out. Just drop by 2 o'clock Eastern on Friday. So, and the links, all that information, general channel, Slack, be there. All right, Amy, turn this over to you for a second.
So next week, probably at the end of this week, next week, we're going to open up the registration to the entirety of the industry. If you've been in Slack, you know that we have registration open for our second annual Tech Summit in St. Pete, February 5th through the 7th. So, and the hotel registration is on that form also. So we'll post the links, but you can see it on our website and in Slack. You want to make sure you get your hotel sooner than later, because that's definitely going to fill up, because we're going to be at the Don Cesar this year. It's going to be a blast. We have over 20 hours of educational content. And based on the feedback from last year's session, we decided to do a business track and the pure development track. So you'll notice that on the agenda. And then we also, based on the feedback, expanded the roundtable sessions. So we're going to have deep dives into various topics, pretty much all one afternoon. And that does include supplier implementation tables. So if you have questions, you bring your developers, you have team members that have questions about, for instance, what we're going to talk about today, PPC, you can actually talk to the suppliers right there during the roundtable sessions. And then we'll finish it off with a couple keynote speakers and of course an intro to our new services that we'll introduce. So plenty of fun, plenty of merch, plenty of sun at the beach. I think, John, you've got a video to share from last year real quick.
Yeah, we're gonna try this, see if this plays through. Amy, let me know if you can't hear though. You got this?
Yes, you can see it. So as if you'll notice here, we had a lot of fun last year, a lot of people coming and going, learning and networking. And that's one thing that really inspires us as we plan all here for this event, is how do we make sure that
because digital transformation is not any one of those, it's all of those together.
Because we always write these standards not for what we can do today. We write these standards for what we can do 5 years down the road.
We look at all these technologies now and we have to make decisions on what do we want to do?
All right.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Advance. All right.
Awesome.
That's it.
So you can
All
see
right, so
we try to
sorry.
have a lot of fun, but we also do a lot of work. And we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to have structured and unstructured networking opportunities, but also learn about things that are affecting our industry from outside and from inside. So.
Yeah, so the kind of rough outline of the agenda is posted on PromoStandard.org. Right, you go into the events, you'll see it in the drop down there. Amy hit it around the head. We wanted to make sure that there's a focus on implementation and a focus on development. So there is very much going to be a business friendly track on the ROI, the case studies, but we really wanted to make sure that we use this event as a opportunity to connect all sides of the supply chain who are implementing, consuming. And this is the place where if you have these random, hey, Raj, I don't like how you do this, or can you show me exactly at HIT how this works? You go and Raj and his crew will be at a table and you can literally just block off a few minutes to work through integration issues. Same thing, Ajay, I know Ajay and Sam and his crew will be there. So we want to make sure that we're providing those on the site opportunities to both make the connections and build your network, but on at the end of the day, implement. right? So we're going to have a very implementation heavy focus, but as well as a very business track. So we're excited. So a lot to come. You're probably going to hear us screaming Tech Summit from the roof for the next 5-6 months, but it is. All right. Fun stuff here. Those of you joining a little late, we get it. It happens. So, all right. So here's what we're gonna do today. PPC, has long been the holy grail of the PromoStandard services in terms of power, complexity, confusion. So today, I want to take PPC and in its simplest forms, break it down to what's the easiest, most simple way to get it going. I'm trying to back up a little bit out of the XML elements. I'll very much go through the documentation and the pieces, but I want to apply the business case on top of it. So we're going to ride along with some diagrams. Stick with me. This is very much, if we were to break this down, this was my surprise to Amy at the beginning, I really want to follow this up. This is PPC 1.0 in terms of the simple way to do PPC, remove the complexities. Now, everybody gets where people get caught up is embroidery or 17 locations printed with 47 colors and all these different PMS colors and what to charge. Like, let's take a step back from that and let's focus on the simplified basics, because once you understand the basics, then you can now understand how to tweak it for the complex configured building different product sets and applying locations, charges, the whole gamut to that. So we're building towards that utopian PPC, powerhouse engine, but we have to all agree on the basics first. So Q&A is live and active. When we get Raj and Robert on here, we'll pick off some of the PPC as well, or some of the Q&A as well. So real quick, some background. And one of the reasons we played that intro clip is that Eric Schoenberger had a pretty cool quote in there I think applies to this, right? Some of these standards are not developed for current capabilities. Maybe a few people have those abilities, but they're really setting up the industry and the standard set for 5 years down the road, so organizations can see where the standards are and start transforming their data to make sure that we're all on the same page. So oddly enough, about 5 years ago, PPC was released. This guy on the right, many of you recognize Paul. Paul was one of the original authors of PPC. So you can blame all of its complexities on him. It's not in the industry anymore, so it's great. So, initially, those of you who've been around for a long time, this was the only place to get pricing in PromoStandards. We have since broken from that and added pricing into Product Data 2.0. Disclaimer is that's web display pricing only. Key value pairs, very simplified pricing, does not handle the complexities of the industry. So, if you're curious on that. I put a bullet point. This is the hard part about PromoStandards. Everything else, a lot of stuff's trivial up to this point. This is the complexities, right? So this is why it's important. We're recording this. We're going to throw it on YouTube, and the follow-up complex version of PPC will also be there. So as people start facing these challenges, this is hopefully a reference point to figure out the whys. For those of you following along, I tend to do this. I throw a lot of QR codes in the links or in the presentation. They all work. So anytime I'm trying to refer to something, hit the QR code. There'll be some at the end for registration, things like that. So if you want to follow along on the actual documentation, you can very much do that. One thing, how are these standards created? We essentially lock the standards committee in a room for 2 to 3 days together and don't let them out except for coffee, looks like Doritos, and liquids. So they tend to fuel themselves well on liquids and potato chips. So, but it's the purpose of size, it's a collaborative effort. We try to make sure we're getting on all standards, the distributor, service provider, supplier input, and we try to make sure we're representing all size firms along the way. So it's not just massive organizations telling little organizations how they should run their business. It's very much a collaborative, open process. And I think where PromoStandard has matured over the years is we have now allowed many avenues for feedback and review along the way for members through Slack. So we've matured in that manner. So I used this image in one of my presentations long time ago. But ultimately, in PromoStandard, this is really how the sausage is made. So this is kind of, I want to give some background and some, I guess, insights into why some of these decisions were made as we go along here. So we have now entered into the highly technical portion, or somewhat technical. So buckle up. Here we go. So we're going to have a lot of these simple diagrams throughout this. So I want to, I think if you understand structurally how PPC works, then plugging in your data, your processes, or consuming data and processes out of here becomes a lot easier. So at its core, PPC has 5 functions or 5 methods, with one of them being the lion's share, obviously the get config. That's the big one. But there's a few, and we're going to walk through these. I promise not to take 6 hours here to walk through these, because we probably could. But there are, what we tend to call in PromoStandard the helper functions. These are the things that set yourself up to be successful, or maybe make implementation of the main function, main method a little easier. And so we're going to roll through these 4 helper functions quickly. They're not complex, but I think there's some insights and value to them and why you should use them. And if you're a supplier, I hope you're implementing these. And we'll kind of talk when we get to Raj and Robert, what the future holds for some of these, because I think some of them are redundant or kind of come along for the ride. So let's go. All right, so we're going to focus on FOB points first. What are the FOB points? Let's just, million miles back is, where are you, quote unquote, shipping your goods from? We tend to see this mostly used for country specific scenarios. So it's like PCNA. They obviously have FOB points in Toronto and FOB points in Pittsburgh. But the whole purpose of this is, it's a required field in the request. So a lot of times FOB points come along with pricing considerations, shipping, currency, language considerations. But it's very important because to suppliers, these things matter a lot. I would say there's not a lot of instances that I've been exposed to in PromoStandards where within a country, you'll get varying pieces of information for PPC, very much so for inventory 2.0, where obviously, multiple facility manufacturers and suppliers, you'll get vastly different information based on locations and FOB points. So real quick, just rolling through this. I'm not going to read you definitions. I'm not going to read you documentation. You can read this for yourself. But I do want to point out some common hiccups that we see along the way. So this will just be some nuggets you pick up on the side here. Localization, country, and language. There's, I would say 95% of the usage here is EN US, right? For those of you who live in the web world, very common combination. So always pass in US, it's US or Canada. It seems to be 99% of the industry, 99% of the usage. There is some Mexico that we've seen implemented, but so I guess the downside of this is that it's a required field. So if you're making a request blindly to a supplier and you're not sure what their values are, I would just first try US and use that as your default when you're implementing. Same thing with English. I know there are some suppliers who also support French implementations and their language. The majority have settled on English. So just always check those defaults in US first, and then kind of traverse through the data from there. So what's the whole purpose of this? One thing is, you really, I think it's important, you get what products are available and what FOB points. For example, let's take PCNA, right? PCNA has some Stanley products. They're not allowed to sell them in Canada, but they are allowed to sell them in the US. So if you were to call their PPC endpoints and pass in their US FOB, you'll get one set of products. And then if you pass in their Canadian FOB, you get a different set of products, right? This is just to help that FOB logic as you're pulling this data. Currency, this is an important one too. There tends to be a lot of currency line up with FOB points. So this is really, why would you use this function? Because when you go and call the get config method, you're going to need to know FOB points, you're going to need to know currency. So now you probably only need to call this very infrequently for a supplier, maybe once a year, once every month. Don't hammer this one as much, because once you get that information, it's pretty static, other than the fact that new products come along, you need to figure out what their FOB points are. So, like I said, it's not the end of the world, but all right, get decoration colors. What's the purpose of this one? This is an interesting one. This is to show what products have what decoration color limitations or availability. We see this implemented very sporadically, unfortunately. So what's a practical application of this? I have let's say a black rubberized coated flashlight where the only decoration color available is white. So what you would get in return for this is, a decoration color of white as the only available decoration color. You'll also see from time to time, people will just replicate their standard color list for all colors and all parts in here. So, this is one of those things I probably wouldn't call every time. This tends to be very static as well. But this is one where you can pass in a product ID, even a decoration location ID, and get back, hey, this black t-shirt on the front has color limitations, and there you can really only print white and reflex blue, right? So it's those limitations. Useful. Depends on how granular you want to get, but just one thing is, so this is the product ID is required here. So really, you're supposed to come in and on a per product level get those limitations. In the wild implementation, how is this useful? It's really that last check when your user's going through if you're trying to automate the color selection for decoration availability through locations, decorations, and products. This is the way to do it. I would say this would be considered that PPC 2.0 on steroids in terms of availability. Get available locations. This, as the definition says, function will provide the names of locations for a given product. So if you're trying to build a library or a database of supplier, product, location, key value pairs, this is the service for you. Essentially, it just says, here's 5,000 SKUs. Here's the 20,000 locations that are available with them, without having to get the full PPC response, which can be cumbersome, and we'll get into that as we go. But it's kind of just a way to, like I said, these are helper functions meant to make the overall piece better. Get available locations. This is a typo. That should say get available charges. Sorry about that. So what this is, these are the charges that are for a given product. Same thing, if you're trying to build a database and not have to traverse through and call PPC as heavily, you can store some of this information outside of the constraints of the large request. So, for example, this black t-shirt might have a setup charge, a run charge, and a packaging charge. Well, that all would come back in the service as well. So, helper functions meant to make the main call less cumbersome and as frequent. All right, sorry about the typo there. All right, this is the big one. Get configuration and pricing. This is where we're going to kind of slowly, or a little slower, walk through this to explain it. And like I said, we want you to understand the structure understand how to implement this at its most basic form. So when you look at it, you're like, oh my God, like this will never work for me. So big picture, right? Product pricing, configuration. So the product, the parts and part groups that allow you to build products and traverse down the product selection tree, right? So there's this product selection engine that is built into here. And we also, where does the pricing come from in PPC? It's essentially how to build your pricing given different part configurations. Eric likes to always give the traditional example of a strawed mug that you can select the mug, the straw, and a box. This is the part configurations, how to do it. We're gonna keep it simple today. We're gonna go single SKU or multi-SKU, single tiered parts to show how simple this really can be. The big debate going right now in PromoStandards is this an additive model or a base pricing plus? For example, when pricing, and this is how you have to use the service, is your first decoration included, or are you assuming all base pricings to be blank and then your charges get added on top of that and are required? Jay and his committee at the Best Practices Committee are going to do a deep dive and help spell this out. But it is when you have PPC discussions as a implementer or consumer or supplier or service provider, I would make sure you understand how the pricing is set up. There are some suppliers who the way, and this goes back to the flexibility. And look, the standard supports this. It goes back to PromoStandards is not here to tell people how to run their business. It's here to create standards that work for the industry. So we've made this flexible enough to support it either way. So we'll get into that in a minute. And configuration is really how to assemble your decoration locations, colors, combos, charges, given your initial product selection. So easy, right? Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to spend 3 seconds on the request, and then we're going to break down the response. Like I said earlier, those helper functions, right, that require currency is required. FOB ID is required. Localization country, language, right? These things are required. So you need to know ahead of time what supplier endpoints support which FOB IDs. So that's why you're going to have to call that FOB service to store a list of FOB points. I would say probably from the wild, FOB ID 1 tends to get used. So if you ever wanted to program in a default, you can always slap that one in there. But just use that helper function to call it as, you know, when you're going to start your implementation of this to get those FOB IDs. Price types we get. So just a kind of a tip here. Most suppliers are supporting customer pricing at this point. I think initially it didn't come that way. If you have customer pricing and let's say you have it on half of your products for a given customer, what do you return on the non-customer pricing? Return the net price, please. Essentially, customer pricing is a variation of net pricing. List pricing is end user friendly, consumer friendly. So, you know, we often get questions on the definition of those. And I know Jay and his crew also do a better job of spelling that out in the Best Practices Committee as well. Obviously, configuration type, blank or decorated. It's pretty simple. Blank is a lot more simple process. Decorated is, you know, it's what we do. That's complications of this whole spiel here. All right. On the right, there's an example of what a request would look like. For those of you who don't know, there's a PromoStandards web service validator that allows you to use as a playground. I literally typed in these values into the validator, hit go, and pow, right? So this is really what a request looks like. Why is there an optional part ID in the request? Because if you're somebody like Sanmar and have 1,500 SKU variant or part ID variants for the same product ID, you probably want a way to break that down and limit it. So if you're ever concerned about too large of payloads, the more values that you pump into the part ID, the more specific you get there, the better, the more concise your response. Okay. All right, here we go. Sorry, there's about a 4-second delay between me hitting the space bar and something happening. So,
Hey, John, we have
um,
little questions in the Q&A if you want to hit them up before you go to the next one.
ooh, I don't know if I do. Let's see.
FOB,
What if you FOBs? We're gonna come back to this one. Because I want to call on somebody to go into FOB. FOB is a very legal term. I don't want it is about the legal transfer of goods. Every company technically at some point is transferring the ownership of those goods. So the FOB, if you're confused by FOB, just where are you shipping these things from? You know, what is your legal drop spot, right? A lot of people US suppliers will have FOB points in Toronto where the supplier is paying to ship those goods out of Toronto, but they're not necessarily originating out of there. But until they get to Toronto, the supplier is on the hook for the legal ownership of those goods because they're paying to get them there. And then how they ship from there is, I would say the largest implementation of FOB points is US suppliers using freight equalization programs to improve their distribution network. Yeah, that's interesting, Brian's question. So I know Raj and Steve and some of the standards committee members are here. That's some great feedback to add a product categorization to the get available locations. Product ID. I'll come back to that one on the product ID is optional because I just have to go backwards in the slides. So, all right, let's keep chugging here. So this is basically the structure, right? Shoot, go back. Sorry. How PPC is broken up is really two sides of it. On the one side, there's at the top we have a product. Products have parts. Parts have prices and location IDs. And then on the other side is locations have decorations, charges, and prices. And it's big, and we're going to dive through each one of these tiers and buckets here. So if you're kind of like, what, like, how is that impossible? Why don't parts have locations? Some of this, believe it or not, was to try to make the responses not as massive. So for those of you who've been long critical of the payload size, there was an attempt to shore this back a little bit. So real quick, this is just a product response. There's not a lot to this, right? This is, we're going to use a tote bag as an example to a lot of this. And I'm going to show some examples here as we get going. So essentially put in the response. The header of the response is part array. What are the parts that come back with location array, right? That's the two forks of the tree we just went through, and I'm going to walk through those. What's the product ID, currency? So you put this information in there. FOB points in this configuration, you put the FOB points in the request. This is a little bit more definition of the FOB, and then it talks about the pricing. It's just really regurgitating some of the request information that went into. But the really most important pieces of this are the initial response essentially kicks back a part array and a location array. All the other stuff comes along for the ride. Those are the keys, right? Parts, locations. So let's look at this part side here for a few seconds. And I'm going to have to pick up the pace here whenever we get through this. So the part description, and this is where Eric used to always get up there and talk about straw, mug, all these tiers, part groupings, optional pieces. Well, let's back off from that for a second. Let's do a simple tote bag. All right. So in my example here, this tote bag has 5 colors, AKA has 5 parts. Now, your tote bag could have 5 sizes and not colors, whatever you call a part. This is your basic level SKU. This is where in the PPC function, you put these in there, right? So you list out your parts, whatever makes them unique, cool, put it in the description, assign it a part group, numerical ID, 99.9% of the time it's going to be part group 1. Is this required? Yes, you have to pick a tote bag. What is this group called? Fine, it's the bag group. Like it's not that overly complicated. Ratio. When you order a yellow bag, how many do you get? You get 1. Is this the default? 99% of the time, yes, it's the default. Location ID. Essentially, this is not essentially, but in practice, this is how you say these configurations, these parts have these locations. My array is an array of 1. So I put an ID in there, which has to tie back to my locations back on the other side of the product tree that I showed. This is essentially how you say, all right, I went down and built this configuration. My configuration was super simple. It was a tote bag. It comes with 5 colors. I picked one. And when I pick one, I need to remember what this location ID is, because I'm going to need that once I link this side of the tree back up with the other side of the tree. But this is the key. Make sure that this value here, fortunately, it's false as far in terms of required. I would recommend using this. This makes the combination of configurations back to the location array light years easier. Takes ambiguity out of it. So, like I said, this is recorded. You can always roll back and look at my examples. Real quick, the part price location array, it's not a lot to it. It's pretty simple, right? It's just pretty much price, unit of measure, discount code. I'm not gonna walk through that. Okay, so we just walked through the part side. That configuration slide, like I said, keep it simple first. Get your single SKU, non-kit, non-crazy things in there first if you haven't. This is this is kind of the where we're at here. So let's kind of dive into locations, then we're going to get Raj and Robert together here. All right, location array. So look, in practicality, I have a bag. Back to my tote bag, you can print on the front pocket, you can print on the back of the bag. If you print on the front pocket, you have silkscreen, embroidery, digital. Or if you print on the back of the bag, maybe you can't embroidery, you can only do silkscreen, digital. This is the section of PPC that describes that scenario down below. Right, so right off product, you have locations array, right? So you either have to pick the front pocket or the back of bag. That's what this describes. So, back to keeping it simple. 2.0 complexities next time. I put in here default values. So what, just some example values. So under locations, this pretty much says this is the front pocket. What are the things, what's the array of decorations that I can do on that front pocket? My example here is I can silkscreen a rectangle that's 4 by 4 inches wide. And you're allowed to substitute decoration locations. You're allowed to substitute methods. We will allow you to buy less than minimum down to a quantity of 75. Your first color of printing is included. So that first silkscreen color is included. By the way, we call them colors. They're not, that's our unit of measure. You can go up to 4 colors. This is the default decoration. So if you were to not specify, we would automatically assign it this way. Oh, by the way, our standard lead time for this method location is 3 days. But if you really want it in 1 day, we can provide that. That's in English what this scenario of the decoration array means. So I know it's a lot, but I just want to convey, we're taking those customer service and sales conversations that people are having every day and converting them to electronic industry speak. That's what this does. That's the purpose of the decoration array. Sorry for oversimplifying it. So next I want to dig into the, charges live underneath the decoration array. So back to my bag example, let's dive into silkscreen, right? What are the charges that are available under that silkscreen scenario that we just described? So there's the charge array. So here's an example, right? I have a charge ID of 100. What is that charge? We call it a setup charge. Great. In PromoStandard world, you have to enumerate it as an order, run, or setup, but it's a setup charge. What do I want to display it as? It's a silkscreen setup charge to give some friendly combination. There are less than minimum charges that apply to this, so that's applicable. You get one of these charges every location that you do. So if you do front pocket, back pocket, you get one of these. And if you remember, I said earlier, my last thing, you have 1 to 4 colors. For every color that you have here, you get one of these charges. So this kind of explains the charge side of configuration. And I hope I'm not overly simplifying this, but this is how it is. Now let's look at price here. Same thing. So how do you describe charge prices? Because this is sometimes there's, all right, for minimum X. So this XY, essentially this is in the complexities we're going to dive into next week or next month. This is where you build out that XY pricing grid. I have a 1x1 grid. There's one cell. So I have one X, one Y value. So since this is a setup charge, there's for one each for every color, you're going to pay $45 on a C. If you repeat it, it's $0. I'm going to just include my repeat discount code there anyway. This price is effective January 1st to December 31st. But this is in its most simple form of a setup charge, the way to convey that you have to pay one of these for each color that you tag along onto a product. I know it's overly simplified, but you have to make this work for your basic products before you can scale this to your complex kits with 700 decoration methods and odd pricing schemes. So like I said, let's just keep going. So like the purpose of this is get a recording on file that people can walk through and see the responses, right? So just remember, this is the response structure. Parts, locations are at the top. Prices, location ID. Locations have decorations. Decorations have charges. Charges have prices. All of that rolls up into this multi-leveled product structure that works. Trust me, it's been out in the wild for 5 to 6 years. This is being consumed by people, entities of all sizes, of all product varieties, apparel, hard goods, made to order. This works for all of them. But the biggest thing is keeping it simple. If you are racking your head against the wall trying to figure this out, go through your most simple product. Your 2-color, 1 part, 1 location, make it work for that, and then scale it. So then next month, I'll get into some of the other stuff Amy wants to do. We'll get into that grid, more that one where I showed a one-dimensional charge configuration. We'll build out a 2-dimensional or 3, a wider embroidery scenario. So having said that, so we have 15 minutes here. Jessica, can you promote Robert and Raj just so we can get them here? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Robert is probably one of the more vocal people on, and here he comes, on PPC and its challenges. So I do think it's important that we get his perspective. Welcome, Robert. How's it going?
Hi there.
All right. So you've seen the belly of the beast with PPC. So I guess what are the, I know you'll give us an honest feedback. What are the biggest challenges you see in implementing PPC today? Or what are some tips that you think if you would have known the first time you went into this would have made this a little bit easier?
The biggest challenge as a service provider is that every supplier interprets the specification differently, especially with respect to how they specify their pricing, especially with using Y units measure. And
so that last pricing piece?
I think there is better clarity on that now, but especially in the beginning, there weren't any best practices in place, and so we worked to handle whatever the suppliers were doing at the time.
Do you
Ideally
find that?
Sorry.
Do you find that suppliers get the product data structure and the decorations and the locations good? It's just the struggle is around building out the pricing for decoration.
Pricing is definitely the most difficult part of it. Configuration is far easier. There are some issues with payload size with respect to products that have hundreds of SKUs, and
what are you doing? Are you trying to use the part IDs to get around that, or what? Like, are you just dealing with the huge payload?
My biggest advice to anybody who's implementing it is take your own cache and feed from your own cache as much as possible. It's harder as a service provider because prices are individual per distributor, per supplier. So you've got a lot of caching if you want to do that. But yeah, we cache and normalize it, and then we pull what we need from our own caches, so we can pull subsets using a slightly different API than the PromoStandard API.
Are the challenges you run into are inconsistencies? Are there, I guess, pieces in the standard that you would like to see, and I guess we'll kind of tease up for Raj too, that you think if done X or a little slightly different would be more useful?
There are some deficiencies, like not specifying whether costs are mandatory and our charges are mandatory, and not being able to have charges that aren't associated with a decoration. There are other problems, such as you can't specify different prices, or it's hard to specify prices for embroidery, where you're looking at, like, if you increase it by 1,000 stitches, because it's per unit. There's some difficulties even with pricing the base parts because of the different X units of measure, whether they're boxes or packages or eaches or whatever. So typically we work in eaches, ideally.
Yes.
And
do you find
but if you want to buy like 2 boxes and 6 extras, then it's a tricky pricing scenario.
Yeah. Right, and I think it's tricky because what we do as an industry,
It's a tricky industry.
There's no standard for the industry, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you want to be able to handle that, but it's definitely, and exposing that information to a user in a way that's understandable is also a tricky problem.
Right. Yeah. You run the challenges. You have to interpret all this and now feed this up in a UI to a user so they can make an informed decision. Which I get the challenge. Raj, you here? Let's go loop you into this as well. Stay around.
Yep,
Robert.
I'm here.
All right. So standards committee, you and Robert both serve on the standards committee. What are there things that you guys as a committee, or you all as a committee, are teeing up for PPC 2 fixes? It's kind of an early preview and what's going on there.
Yeah, there's a couple of items that are on the top of my mind. One is communicating contract decoration or solving contract decoration pricing. I think there's not a good solution for that. I think the way we solved it, the way the data structure is, I think we need to figure out how to normalize it correctly so we can communicate kit pricing, how kit with like special pack, right? All those charges that are ancillary and may not be tied to the product itself. I think we have to figure out how order level charges may not be tied to product can be communicated into this response. And the third is something that me and a few team members have been talking. Artwork is such a critical piece of the puzzle in Promo. And since configuration goes into the decoration level, we need to figure out how to communicate art files needed. So a lot of customers, they may not know the different colorways and how embroidery files have specific file formats that can work with a specific type of print machine. And since we go all the way into depth of the decoration, maybe that's an object we can add. I think those are the three main components that I can think of that will help make a better version of pricing and config.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, back there's 2 big things I keep hearing is, well, in the history of this, PPC was developed before the PO standard. So very quickly right before it, but there was some realities of, all right, now I need to take this order conform and change and convert it to an order. And then yes, there's that gap of, hey, I have, I'm going to select these 2 locations and these 2 methods for this one product. Oh, by the way, there's an art file that goes with them. Oh, by the way, that's the, the big piece we keep hearing is, how do I charge that? How do I put this order level charge through and communicate this that has nothing to do with the product or my, so we get it. Robert, I mean, is there other things that you'd like to see on top of what Raj said?
Things that I would like to see in version 2 would probably be standardization either of the pricing algorithm or having an endpoint for getting a quote given a configuration. I'd like to see, I don't know, I'd like it if I could get responses back really quickly from suppliers so that I could provide live data without having to do as much caching on my end. I know that's harder with some of the systems. Suppliers that have to do a lot of caching and normalizing on their own end in that case. It would be nice to be able to winnow down SKUs quickly based on things like size and color, but not restricted to size and color. Maybe you want to winnow them down by flavor or scent or whatever. Like, I think we need to be a bit more generic in the way we define things like that. Yeah, there's a number of improvements that I think we can bring to the second version of the
Raj,
specification and closer integration with the PO spec.
Yeah, I think that's the key now is bringing this full circle to get the PO spec PPC to where you can. And I love the idea of a quoting engine or config. I quoted and this was my configuration. Pass along this configuration ID to the PO and call it a day. And kind of back to Brian in the Q&A, his initial comment of, along that, are there ways to winnow down the responses based on categories, based on any number of factors? Okay, let's Raj, peek under the curtain. Timeline for development of PPC2. Where's it on your docket?
I think we have a few services like the order management, the order status, and then we're also looking at the remittance advice. And some of you have seen those in these sessions. And so we're trying to wrap those up. But right after that, I think PPC is in our agenda. So hopefully by the time when we meet in person, which is in the tech summit, we should have some sort of like skeleton visual to walk through, and then agree as a group and then get something in front of the board members.
Yeah. I agree. I think that committee has a heavy lift. There's a lot of cool things rolling out of there that I think are going to make. I think the biggest piece now is we have the PO spec that works. It's now making all these other things work easier with the PO spec, and that's got to be the goal for this. Real quick, I'm going to keep you two here in case there's any questions. Is it possible in PPC to have a charge that is only seen by certain customers or certain charges that customers shouldn't see? Yes. Use the customer specific field in the request. Obviously, where the credentials are coming from and what account they're tied to. If you pass in customer as a parameter, now you have the ability to return a whole custom set of data that just isn't pricing. Robert will probably, cringes when I say that because as a service provider, it makes all of his life more difficult. But yes, you can use that custom field or customer field to have specific responses based on the user. Reorders, is there anything to simplify? I think the reorders for anything to simplify. I think this comes back to Robert's quoting engine and a quote concept, right? Where you can store a configuration ID. It's like, hey, this is my configuration ID for this, and this is, and you would just quickly reference that on your repeat order. The PromoStandard repeat mechanism is pretty straightforward. It's effective. Could we tie in configuration to reorder? Yes, for sure. Brian, I'm going to reach out to you. You have some good questions. I'll reach out to you afterwards in Slack, and we kind of we'll carry that conversation there. So F. Van Gogh says, what happens to when standards become too complex for vendor support? Is this taken into consideration? Interesting question. The complexity there is, or the issue is, our end users and salespeople aren't making their processes any less confusing, right? So we need to, as an industry and as technologists in our industry, find ways to model their behavior, because us telling them that they can't sell certain things certain ways, that ship sailed a long time ago. So what makes this industry unique is that customization aspect of it. Now, our job as technologists is to simplify it as much as possible and create a structure that we can communicate effectively. But yes, this PPC has always been challenging, but because taking the wild west of sales and marketing and product variants and options out there and sandwiching them into one spec has its challenges, but with a flexible enough but not too flexible that drives Robert crazy standard, we can convey these complexities across the supply chain. And it's not the
I
answer.
think the thing is, like, the standard is only as complex, like the complexity is all on the supplier's end. If they want to provide simple pricing, then ideally we can make the standard easy enough to provide simple pricing. But if they want to have wild options, then
yes,
the standard
Yeah.
has to provide escape mechanisms for them to do that.
yeah. In my
But
example
they
today was
don't
very
have to,
simple.
they don't have to go that route.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, you as a supplier or a vendor do not have to convey all your options in the standard. You're like Tim Nail at Bit Koozie was always, he knew that this was the top 90%. So why drive yourself crazy to get that last 10%, right? It's at some point business decisions have to be made.
John,
over.
I was just suggesting they simplify prices across the board.
Yes. So yeah, I think we would all benefit from that. Okay. Amy, you want to hang around and we'll just go through a few more things. Raj, Robert, thanks for the contributions here today. Always cool to see under the hood and see these things in the real world being implemented. So thank you guys. Everybody's going to hang around for 2 more seconds before you drop off like you are. Just kind of want to cover last thing. So sorry. If you are, look in Slack in the general channel today to register for the hackathon presentations on Friday. You don't have to be participating in the hackathon to do it. So definitely get on board there. Amy, is there anything else we want to hit before we peace out here?
No, I think we hit it all. Just a reminder, hackathon Friday, next training session next month.
TBD. I know.
And look out if you haven't taken a look at the new agenda for the tech summit, and if you haven't registered and booked your hotel, I would get on that too.
Yes. And if you have any questions on that, Jessica's here as a resource, admin at PromoStandards. Keep the conversations in Slack. I think there's some good questions here that I'd like to continue over there. So, we'll definitely get that going. If you have other PPC feedback, it's on the standards committee's docket to look at deficiencies and improvements. So as a member, one of your things is providing feedback. So make sure you reach out to, you've met Robert, you met Raj today, myself, Jessica, anybody, to pass that feedback along, because this is a community-driven effort here. So the more feedback we can get, what they do is they start off with feedback, that has many bullet points, 25, 30 bullet points of things that people have issues with. They try to pick them off in the most efficient manner for the standards. So having said that, thank you, everybody. We did it once again. Third Tuesday every month. Be there.
Thanks, everyone.